Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. A reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 6, Chapter 4, the Hamsa Guya prayers, text 14. Yasamupatitam deha akashan manyomubanam atma jignashaya yachet sagunan ativartate yasamupatitam deha akashan manyomubanam atma jignashaya yachet sagunan ativartate yasamupatitam deha akashan manyomubanan atma jignashaya yachet sagunan ativartate yasamupatitam deha akashan manyomubanam atma jignashaya yachet sagunan ativartate yasamupatitam deha akashan manyomubanan atma jignashaya yachet sagunan ativartate. Sagunan ativartate deha akashan manyomubanam atma jignashaya yachet sagunan ativartate. Ladies? Bhubanam atma vignashaya yachet sagunan ativartate sagunan ativartate. Ya, anyone who samutpatitam, suddenly awakened, dehe, in the body, akashat, from the sky, manyum, anger, ulbanam, powerful, atma jignashaya, by inquiry into spiritual realization or self-realization. Yachet, subdues, sa, that person. Gunan, the modes of material nature. Attivartate, transcends. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki. One who inquires into self-realization and thus subdues his powerful anger, which awakens suddenly in the body as if falling from the sky, transcends the influence of the modes of material nature. Please repeat. One who inquires into self-realization and thus subdues his powerful anger, which awakens suddenly in the body as if falling from the sky, transcends the influence of the modes of material nature. Purport. When one becomes angry, he forgets himself and his situation. But if one is able to consider his situation by knowledge, one transcends the influence of the modes of material nature. One is always a servant of lusty desires, anger, greed, illusion, envy, and so forth. But if one obtains sufficient strength in spiritual advancement, one can control them. One who obtains such control will always be transcendentally situated, untouched by the modes of material nature. This is only possible when one fully engages in the service of the Lord, as the Lord says in Bhagavad Gita 14:26, Mam Chayo Vyapita Chena Bhakti Yogena Sevate. One who engages in devotional service, who does not fall down in any circumstance, at once transcends the modes of material nature and thus comes to the spiritual platform. By engaging one in devotional service, the Krishna consciousness movement keeps one always transcendental to anger, greed, lust, envy, and so forth. One must perform devotional service because otherwise one will become victimized by the modes of material nature. Translation again. One who inquires into self-realization and thus subdues his powerful anger, which awakens suddenly in the body as if falling from the sky, transcends the influence of the modes of material nature. Om Majanatamandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshu Amitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manovishnam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayarupa Gadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. One must perform devotional service because otherwise one will become victimized by the modes of material nature. I don't know so much about India, but in the West, becoming a victim is like something that we don't want. Becoming a victim of anything is something that we do not want. So likewise here, becoming a victim of the modes of material nature is something that we should not want. We should make sure we can do all we can to avoid that. And Srila Prabhupada, of course, is giving the answer twice in the purport, and the answer is that one must perform devotional service, so always to be engaged in devotional service. And then we'll actually be protected from falling foul and becoming a victim to anger and all of these other unwanted anarthas. And then in the first part of the purport, Srila Prabhupada explained, in the translation, it's explained that, it's in the purport, my apologies, where it says that through knowledge, it's done through knowledge. Krishna tells us in the Bhagavad Gita, in the 6th chapter, he says, Udared atmanatmanam natmanam uvashadiyet. A verse that always interests me, that the mind, and we know that the intelligence is above the mind, of course, so the intelligence should dictate to the mind, but the mind, it's either our best friend or it's our worst enemy. There really isn't much middle ground with that statement. It's either our best friend or it's our worst enemy. So, and there's a big difference between the two things. And Prabhupada explains that it's our best friend when we control it. When we're in control of the mind, then it becomes our best friend. And then conversely, if we don't control it, it becomes our worst enemy. And you see that. I want to give a material example, just to sort of emphasize the point. Again, I don't know so much about the streets of India, but in the streets of the Western world, you see so many people, for varying reasons, although generally one of the common denominators is that they're completely addicted to intoxication. That tends to be a common denominator. And they live such miserable lives, living on the streets like that. I remember one time, Bibi Govinda Maharaj, he came to Dublin, where I'm based, where I'm from, and we went on a walk around the streets, and he actually commented on it. He said, hey, Praghosh, seems like your city is one of the worst cities in the world for this. So many people living on the street. And we passed one guy, very gross, the ground where he was lying became his toilet. It's just so disgusting. Then on the flip side, you have people, what to speak of sadhus, what to speak of transcendentalists, what to speak of personalities like Srila Prabhupada. But even in the material world, if you take an example like somebody like Nelson Mandela, who was, for those who don't know, I'm sure you do, was put in jail for 30, I think in solitary confinement also, for 34 years. 34 years. And his crime was that he suggested that everybody in South Africa should be allowed to vote. That was his crime, and he was jailed for 34 years. When he was released and different stories came out, his guards, all of his guards said that he was the perfect gentleman. He never became angry. He never in any way blamed them for anything. And he was very pleasant through the whole thing. So you can see a person who has some control of the mind like that. So those two completely different things. And then if we don't have that control of the mind, this anger awakens in our body as if it's fallen from the sky. Prabhupada explains in another part of, I think another purport in the Srimad Bhagavatam, that anger is carried through the blood. And actually we have a saying in English, my blood boils. And how many of us in the room have ever become angry? Or let me say it the other way, how many have never become angry? Fantastic. We shall all follow Kamlesh Krishna Prabhu. He is our guru. So when you become angry, that feeling of it just awakening in our body, and when it awakens, it suddenly can overcome everything in our body. And you'll see people who are angry, oftentimes you'll see the veins on their neck will protrude, and they lose control. So udared atmanatmanam natmanam uvashadiyet, that they lose control of their faculties. And so many crimes in the material world come as a result of people becoming angry and doing things that they would never do if they weren't angry and they hadn't lost control. So the material world, and Prabhupada of course doesn't just talk about anger, but he's talking about lust, greed, envy, etc. These qualities, they cause so much misery. And of course, they're all under the control of the material nature. Devahuti in the third canto of Bhagavatam, Devahuti, speaking to her son, Kapila Dev, Lord Kapila, and says, Nirvina nitaram bhumam asad indriya tarshanat. And she's saying that, I'm sick of it. And this is an interesting thing also, that when we become angry, when we lose control, and, I'm pretty expert on this, just to let you all know. I also put my hand up to becoming angry. That when we lose control and become angry, and then we do whatever we do, or we say whatever we do, every time afterwards, when we calm down and we take control again of our senses like that, there is regret. We regret. We didn't want to do that. So she's saying to Lord Kapila that I am just sick. I'm sick of the misery that comes from, she doesn't specifically say anger, but she says, I'm sick of the misery that comes from engaging with the material senses, which then drag me down. And the word that she uses, or Prabhupada uses, drags me down into the abyss of the mode of ignorance. Abyss, Prabhupada has a brilliant turn of phrase for a person who English was not his first language, has an incredible turn of phrase. He talks about the modes of nature, the stringent modes of nature. I mean, I must say, obviously I went to school, and, as I said, I'm from Ireland, and they say that the best English speakers in the world are the Irish. They're better than the English. Isn't that right, Kamleshwar? And they're definitely better than the Americans. We all know that, divided by a common language. But reading Prabhupada's books, it really was another education, his use of language. Jai, Lashmidev ki jai, Shishi Radha Madha Mohan ki jai, Gunatai ki jai, Krishna Balaram ki jai, Hare Krishna. It was really an education. So the stringent laws of material nature, whenever I say that word or hear that word, I think of these, you ever see these suspension bridges that they have? And those suspension bridges, they have nothing supporting them in the water. Quite amazing actually how they do it. They're just completely free of touching the water, but they have these steel cables that suspend from the land to the bridge. And if you ever look up close at those cables, there's just no give in them. There's just no give. They may all move with the wind together, but in terms of the actual cable, there's no give. It's just rigid like that. So that's it, like the stringent laws of material nature. So abyss is another one of those words. Abyss, it's like, wow, it basically means you fall into a hole, let's say, that has no bottom. It's just endless. It's an abyss. And Devahuti is saying that I'm sick of this connection, the engagement with the senses that is dragging me down into this abyss of ignorance, being controlled by the material energy. So in this particular pastime, the Prachetas, they get angry because they see all the trees have taken over the earth like that, grown everywhere. And Prabhupada explains in these previous purports that tapasya, tapyante lokatapena, tapasya should be performed. That's a wonderful verse, by the way, that, tapyante lokatapena, because it's explaining that tapasya, the performance of tapasya, is actually done out of compassion. Compassion for the fallen souls who are lost in this abyss of the material world. And that's what devotees perform tapasya for. They don't perform it to then become angry and upset when somebody disturbs them or something happens that isn't exactly according to what they want, which is what the Prachetas are doing. And Prabhupada compares that to the likes of Hiranyakashipu and the likes of Ravana, that they were performing great tapasya. I mean, Hiranyakashipu's tapasya, it's like, wow, it's just an extraordinary tapasya that he performs. But of course, it's for the wrong motive. So Prabhupada is saying that tapasya austerity should be performed for the welfare of others, like that. And a devotee performing tapasya, if they get disturbed or something happens, the verse that we chant every day, Trinadapi Sunichena, Tarodapi Sahishnuna, that we just consider ourselves, we should be considering ourselves more humble than a blade of grass, which is quite an extraordinary realization to fully achieve. But that should be our meditation. And when you think about, these great souls like Devahuti saying that to Lord Kapila, who are we to think that, or we should take inspiration from that to always understand the position that we find ourselves in the material world. So in this pastime, Soma, the deity of the moon, that's an interesting thing as well, and a very nice point that's made there, that you want to kill all these trees. You want to scorch, it's like a scorched earth policy that they do through a fire like that. You want to destroy all these trees. But these trees are also living entities. And not only are they living entities, but they perform a great service. Here in India, many, many times when I go out, like today, and the sun is shining, I'm constantly looking for where the next piece of shade is. And of course, trees, one of their main services, of course they provide fruits and they provide all of those kind of things, but one of the main things that they provide is shade. And it's so amazing, like, the relief that you get in a hot country like India. You might notice I'm commenting on this point quite a bit, because hot weather, and particularly bright sunshine, is like a real thing for me to avoid. So, and when you come into the shade, boy, I don't know, it feels like the temperature drops 10 degrees or something, and you feel great relief. So Soma is saying to the Prachetas that, actually, their performance of austerity is meant to benefit living entities. Now you've become angry, and now you want to kill living entities. Your performance of austerity is meant to please the supersoul. And now you've become angry, you're actually killing the home of the supersoul, which is another amazing thing, that the supersoul is in every living entity. And no matter how lost that living entity becomes in the material world, no matter where it finds itself going into this abyss of the material world, how deep it descends, I mean, we can identify misery in this material world. If we've got some pain or some difficulty with the material body, I've had a couple of headaches while I've been here in Ujjain, and it's kind of like it just knocks you out. The headache just knocks you out. Well, here's the newsflash, that I can experience suffering in this material world billions of times. This is a nice example even that from the point of view of the subtle body, that even when we leave the gross material body, if we've been bold boys and bold girls, we may not go to such a wonderful place. We may go to some of these incredible places described in the previous canto, like that. But we've left our material body, we're functioning before we find the next place we go to in a subtle body. And it's described in that subtle body while it's being decided. How many living entities are just on this planet? They say there are about in excess of 7 billion human beings. 7 billion human beings. There are 8,400,000 species of life. In those species, there are so many subspecies. There are just trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of living entities that are in this material realm. So naturally, when they leave their body, I think every day there's something like, by the way, I think the figure is around 500,000. I think 500,000 human beings leave their body every day, something like that. So can you imagine if you put all the species together, how many entities are leaving their body every day? It's billions and billions and billions of it. So it's a complicated process for Yamaraj and his team to just be figuring out where everyone's going. And I remember reading one description where it's kind of like, and devotees that really know this one, it's kind of like at an airport where you have the air bridges to get onto your plane. You know that? The air bridges? And you get to your gate or whatever, and they haven't decided yet, or you're in the departure lounge, your gate hasn't been decided, and they can change at any time the air bridge to get onto your particular airplane. So Yamaraj, at any time, they're deciding, okay, Praghosh, okay, what have you done? Well, on the good side, you've done this. Can't find anything else. On the bad side, you've done this. So we're trying to figure out where you're going like that. And while they're trying to figure out, I'm in my subtle body, and I'm a captive. I'm in prison, and Yamaraj's attendants are keeping care of me, for want of a better word. And his dogs, they're all biting at you, biting at the subtle body. And it's described that the pain is so torturous, it's so immense, it's so incredible, that the only thing that you want to do is you want to die. But the problem is you're already dead. You're in your subtle body. You can't die. You've already done that like that. So this is. But the super soul. That was my point. But the super soul travels with all of us everywhere, no matter how far we descend in the material realm. Yeah, so sweet. How far we descend in the material realm, the super soul travels with us. So therefore, you should not be killing these living entities. That's the message that Soma is giving to the Prachetas, that you should not be killing these living entities. And Prabhupada makes another interesting point, by the way. Soma is the deity of the moon planet. And Prabhupada says, he explains, obviously that the moon, as we know, and I think that's accepted, as far as I know, that's completely accepted, not just by devotees, but it's a general acceptance, that the moon, without the moon, our vegetables wouldn't grow. They wouldn't and produce all the goodness that they produce. The moon has a big influence on the growth of all vegetation. And Prabhupada says, it's interesting that the moon, the deity of the moon, who is in control of all the vegetation on all the planets, I guess, but certainly our planet here, yet the non-devotees will tell us that there's no vegetation on the moon. So Soma's own planet, his own planet, has no vegetation, yet the moon is responsible for all the vegetation in the universe growing and developing like that. So it's just an interesting thing in relation to did they go to the moon, didn't they go to the moon, and where is the moon and what is the moon, etc. So Prabhupada's making that point. He also makes the point in these purports, which I thought was really interesting reading it, is that he gives a description of food, the principle of food, and the food chain, and who eats what in the food chain. And it's stated in that purport that two-legged animals, us, human beings, two-legged living entities, eat four-legged living entities. And Prabhupada explains that the deer and the goats, etc., are actually food for us. But the cows, of course, are never food for us. So it's interesting, and Prabhupada doesn't qualify it. At least there, he doesn't qualify that statement. He just says the deers and the goats, are food for two-legged animals. So I don't know what's on the menu for breakfast prashadam. But it's interesting, he doesn't actually qualify it. But even tell a little story about a gentleman who lived in 17th century England in a place called Salford, which is near Manchester in the UK, in the 17th century, so in the 1800s, so like sort of 250 years ago, this gentleman lived. And his name was William Cowherd, was his name, which is an interesting name, William Cowherd. And he was a preacher. He was a Christian preacher. And he had to start his own church because he had some realization, wonderful realization, that everybody should be vegetarian, including goats and deer, by the way, that they couldn't be eaten. So he had that realization. So he started his own church. And the one condition for becoming a member of his church, not a priest, but just even a congregational member of his church, the one condition was that you had to sign a contract. And the contract that you signed was that you would be a vegetarian for the rest of your life. And you would not eat any meat or any fish. I'm not sure about eggs, but any meat or any fish. And he preached this vigorously. Now this is, you have to understand, the 1800s in Salford in Manchester, this would have been like a really miserable place, but this was his message that you had to do. And he was preaching that this will make our lives much, much better. There was such aggression towards this, because this was, where is this guy coming from, All we've ever done, this is our diet and has been our diet for centuries or whatever. Who the hell is this guy thinking? There was such animosity and aggression towards him that whenever one of his congregation died, the headlines in the Manchester newspapers was, "Just see another vegetarian dead." As if there was a connection, but as if meat eaters didn't die too. I remember Prabhupada, when he was asked about that question by that kind of quite aggressive radio host, and he was asked, I think the question went like this, what are you doing here, Swamiji? What are you doing here? What can you teach us? Look at the death rate in India. And of course, he's trying to imply that the death rate in India, maybe it's 60 years or something, whereas the death rate in America is 70 or 75 or whatever. So what can you teach us, Swamiji, coming here when look at the death rate in India? And Prabhupada said, oh yes, death rate, 100% everywhere, like that. So in the same way, they were trying to use the fact that this guy was preaching this. And actually, when he passed away, it was one of his followers that started the Vegetarian Society in the UK. And they say, at least Google says, that at that time, when he started that, there were more vegetarian eateries, particularly in Manchester, in the 1800s than there are today, which is actually quite an interesting statistic. So anyway, this world, it's full of dilemmas. This dilemma being that Prabhupada says in that purport, and there are many things we can find like that. In that purport, Prabhupada is almost endorsing the eating of deers and goats. Now, of course, we don't eat deers and goats, but because he doesn't qualify it. So there are so many dilemmas that we'll find. We'll read Mahabharata, we'll see all of those different moral dilemmas and difficulties that are there. And actually, I'll just tell one more story, another interesting thing about dilemmas and people suffering in the material world. Again, the principle of Udared Atmanatmanam Natmanam Uvashadayat, that if we can control our mind, then that makes our lives so much easier, so much more easy to navigate this material world. Whereas if we don't, we run into so many problems. So this story, it's presented as being a true story. I don't know if it's true, but there's a gentleman. He's traveling somewhere, and he's heading home, and he crosses a bridge. He's crossing a bridge, and he sees another guy standing on the bridge, about to jump off. He's about to jump off the bridge. So naturally, we all have somewhere inside us, we have natural compassion. So he thinks he wants to be compassionate to this chap. So he says to him, what are you doing? He says, well, I'm going to jump. He says, well, why? Why are you going to jump? And the gentleman says, because nobody loves me. Which again, is an interesting thing. We all want to be loved. We all want to give love, and we all want to be loved. It's just such a key thing that we all need it. It's not just wanting it. We actually need that. We need to be able to, we need someone to love us, and we also want to give love or need to give love like that. So he says, nobody loves me. And this gentleman responded and said, do you believe in God? And he said, yeah. And he says, well, God loves you. So, don't jump. And he says, are you a Christian? And he says, yes, I'm a Christian. And he says, I'm also a Christian. He says, are you a Catholic or a Protestant? And he says, I'm a Protestant. He says, wow. He says, I'm also a Protestant. So they were starting to bond. There's this kind of bond was taking place. He says, I'm also a Protestant. He says, wow, you're okay. What denomination? And the chap said, I'm a Baptist. They actually say, don't they? I think the experts in this area say that you keep a person talking. If they're about to commit suicide, the best thing to do is keep them talking. So he was doing two things. He was keeping them talking, and he was also bonding with him. And he says, I'm a Baptist. And he says, wow, I'm also a Baptist. Wow. He says, are you a Northern or a Southern Baptist? And he says, I'm a Northern Baptist. He says, wow, I'm also a Northern Baptist. And he says, wow. This was really going well. He says, are you a Northern Conservative Baptist or a Northern Liberal Baptist? He says, I'm a Northern Conservative Baptist. He says, wow, I'm also a Northern Conservative Baptist. And he says, well, he says, are you from the Great Lakes region or from the Eastern region? And he says, I'm from the Great Lakes region. And he says, wow, I'm also from the Great Lakes region. And he says, are you from the 1879 Reform group or the 1912 Reform group? He says, oh, I'm from the 1912 Reform group. And the other guy says, oh, well, I'm from the 1879 Reform group. And he pushed him over. So that's what we have to be protecting people from. We have to be protecting them from this identification with the material body. And of course, any identification with the material body automatically means that we're identifying with the modes of nature, or we're controlled by the modes of nature. And any influence that the modes of nature have on us bring nothing but suffering. So we have to develop our compassion, and of course Prabhupada is a wonderful example to follow. And Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, Mayi sarvani karmani sanyasatma chetasa nirashirnimamo bhutva yujasva vigatashvara. He says to Arjuna, when Arjuna, as we know, is quote-unquote having difficulties with the whole battle of Kurukshetra and killing people, and he says to him, therefore, O Arjuna, surrendering unto me everything with no desire for profit and complete surrender, you should, and free from lethargy, fight, do your service. So in the same way, we could imagine, I'm sure there are people today here, sitting here today, that will go to work, have a job and they will go to work. Can you imagine if your boss tells you, well, from now on, I'm not paying you anything? But that's exactly what Krishna is saying to Arjuna, free from any desire for profit, and also free from lethargy, stand and fight. So that's the kind of mood that we should try to develop when trying to reach out and give people Krishna consciousness, because they're lost. Prabhupada uses this phrase in the Bhagavatam. Many times he uses this phrase, will-o'-the-wisp. The material world, sense gratification, engagement with the senses. You think you're going to be happy, but actually it's nothing but a will-o'-the-wisp. And it's a phantasmagoria, another one of those wonderful words that I never knew until I read Srila Prabhupada's books. I'd never heard of that word, phantasmagoria, but you really can understand what it means. It's a will-o'-the-wisp, it's a phantasmagoria, it's useless, it's meaningless. Well, it's not meaningless in the sense that the only thing it will bring you is suffering and difficulty like that. So people need guidance. That phrase, will-o'-the-wisp, I don't know if any of you are aware, I only became aware of this relatively recently, but that phrase, will-o'-the-wisp, where it comes from, it actually comes from, again, it's back in the UK, in England, going back before electricity existed. And there were two counties on the eastern side of England. One is called Norfolk, and one is called Lincolnshire. And those places are famous for the Norfolk Downs and the Lincolnshire Fens. Actually, those two counties are the nearest counties to Holland, to the Netherlands, where the Netherlands is practically all below sea level. It's one of those countries that's going to get it first if ever a tsunami hits Europe. Anyway, it's below sea level. But also, much of the Norfolk Downs and the Lincolnshire Fens, they're also below sea level. So before electricity was invented, people had to cross them on a daily basis to get to and from work. They had to cross these places on a daily basis. So the government, because that's what governments are meant to do, and that's what this whole chapter is talking about. Governments are meant to protect citizens. It's the first duty of a king, is to protect the citizens. So they're meant to protect the citizens. So they wanted to help people get through these dangerous places, because if you walk through the Norfolk Fens, or the Lincolnshire Fens and Norfolk Downs, if you walk through them, and you hit one of the bogs, the marshy bogs, you'll be sucked in, and it's not just water that you can swim in, it's mixed with the mud and the grasses, and you'll immediately get sucked and tangled, and you'll drown. Many, many people have died crossing these things. Even today, people still do. So the government wanted to protect the citizens, so they created this thing, this job, this service job, and they titled it Jack of the Lantern. Jack of the Lantern. And these Jack of the Lanterns were men, maybe women also, but men, who would carry lamps, and people could see the lamp. Now, it wasn't that they waited anywhere for people to come. They just continually walked through the fens and the downs on the safe paths. So whenever anybody came to the general area, they would look out in the distance, and they would see some lamps, and they would immediately walk to those lamps to be guided by them to get to the other side safely. But of course, it's the material world, padam padam yad vipadam, it's the material world. There's always danger, and there's always, there's always contrasts, and there's always all that kind of stuff. So another phenomena of the Norfolk Downs and the Lincolnshire Fens, a natural phenomena, was that they would produce from time to time methane gas. And the methane gas would sometimes ignite. So sometimes the unlucky people, of course, there's no such thing as coincidences or being unlucky. We have our karma, and that's kind of the end of it. But anyway, some people would come, they would look out into the distance, and just at the time they're doing that, some of this methane gas would self-ignite. And they would look and they would think, Jack of the Lantern, and they would walk straight towards that light. And as they walked straight towards that light, many times they would just fall into a marshy bog, and they were drowned like that. So that methane gas self-igniting was known as will-o'-the-wisp. That's what it was known as. And I'm sure that's where Prabhupada probably got that phrase from, will-o'-the-wisp, like that. And it explains the material world. Prabhupada explains it's like a phantasmagoria. This is a phantasmagoria. It just ignites for some minutes, enough for people to follow it, and then they just sink. So people need to be led. They need to be led, not by a will-o'-the-wisp, but by a Jack of the Lantern. And here's another newsflash. Every one of you sitting in this room, and everyone sitting in any Hare Krishna ISKCON temple around the world, in Srimad Bhagavatam class or whatever the case may be, they are all Jack of the Lanterns. We have been given from Srila Prabhupada, and obviously from the previous acharyas, all the way back to Lord Krishna, we have been given the torchlight of knowledge. We have been given that lantern that can actually save people from the phantasmagoria of this material world. And it's the only thing that Prabhupada asks of us. He doesn't, there's no charge. I've stayed here for nearly 2 weeks here in Ujjain, which has been absolutely wonderful, wonderful, wonderful experience. I was here actually for the opening many, many years ago, but this is my only time back. And it's just been an incredible experience. And the devotees have served us so beautifully, so nicely. Not one bit of anger. I didn't see any anger. So when all of you put your hand up saying that you sometimes get angry, hey, I didn't see any. And the facility has been glorious. It's been wonderful, wonderful experience. Now, why am I saying all that? What was I saying? Will-o'-the-wisp, Jack of the Lantern, yeah, but the connection between why I'm here and anyway, it's gone. But oh yeah, payment. And you didn't charge me a penny. I came here with 100 rupees in my pocket. And I still have 100 rupees in my pocket. Beautiful prasadam, put on an extra few pounds, hopefully not an extra few kilos. And absolutely glorious, wonderful experience the whole time we've been here. Not a penny, didn't cost us a penny. And it's the same for everything that Srila Prabhupada has given us. He doesn't charge us a single rupee for it. The only thing he asks is that we try to pass this message on to other people who are not so fortunate as us and who are still following the will-o'-the-wisp instead of the Jack of the Lantern. So please, let your Jack of the Lantern, your torchlight of knowledge, let it shine really, really bright and keep bringing more and more people. So as this temple room soon becomes far too small for everybody and you have to build another temple, a bigger one, and that we fill all of these well, basically we fill the whole material world with devotional service. Hare Krishna. Thank you all very much. I have no idea what time it is. Okay. So if there's any questions or comments, I guess we have five minutes or so. Any questions or comments? Please feel free. No? Yes, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for your wonderful class. As you know that when Prachetas, they became angry and they burnt up all the trees. So vegetation and all these things are required for this earth planet, as you know. But in regard to this point, like there is a preeminent ecologist from Howard University. He says, his name is Mr. E.O. Wilson, and he says, imagine if all human beings are wiped off from this planet of Earth. Even if there is not even a single human being on this planet of Earth, what would happen to this Earth planet? He says the Earth planet will benefit immensely, and the global warming will be repaired back, and the degenerated rainforest will be regenerated, and the extinct species will be revived back, because physically we human beings are not at all required for this Earth planet. So how do we, reconcile these 2 points? Like material scientists say that, we are not at all required for this Earth planet. These human beings are not required.
Well, it's really funny, he's speaking into a microphone, and I'm going close. I'm trying to really hear, because it makes no difference. The speakers are probably behind me. I'm probably going further away from what I can hear. I think your question was, Professor Wilson in Harvard University says this planet will be much better if there are no human beings on it because we exploit the planet, I think basically was your question. That was your question? Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you. Well, Professor Wilson is actually correct. The very first day, the very first night and morning that I stayed in a Hare Krishna ashram, very first night. The next morning, getting up for Mangal Arati, and you go into the communal bathroom, and there are, whatever it was, 3 or 4 sinks like that, and I'm brushing my teeth. It's the very first day, brushing my teeth, and I have the tap running. And the devotee beside me says, no, he leans over and he knocks it down or turns it, whatever it was, and turns it off. And he says, Prabhu, which was great that he called me Prabhu. And he says, Prabhu, stop wasting Krishna's energy. And I always remember that, but now with the ecological movement so prominent and, wanting to save energy and this and that and all the different things that we know about the ecological movement, it's actually very interesting. Devotees were the first ecologists in that sense. Because saving the planet and saving energy and all that kind of stuff, in the early 80s, that wasn't a mantra. No one talked about that. It wasn't an issue. Professor Wilson, I don't know how old he is, but he wasn't talking about these things in the early 80s. Maybe there was a little, maybe if you really look for it, you might find some people who would have been tuned in. But the vast majority of people had no interest. So in that sense, devotees, right from the very Krishna's energy, don't waste Krishna's energy. And that's something that we've all been trained up to do. So it's not that this planet, Prabhupada one time, he was flying over Australia from, I guess, one coast to the other, from Perth to Sydney or Sydney to Perth, whatever it was. And it's a vast country, Australia. Such an interesting country as well, because it's a massive landmass, but it's disconnected from all other land masses. So it has animals and creatures that no other part of the world actually has, The duck-billed platypus I used to always hear about in school, and all these different weird animals. Anyways, he flew over, and he said, whoever was with him, I don't know who his secretary servant was, maybe Shrutakirti Prabhu, I don't know, and he said to him, just see, they say there is not enough land on this planet to feed the population. We have flown for the last 4 or 5 hours, whatever it is, and we haven't seen one human being. All we've seen is land that can be cultivated, etc., like that. So if Mr. Wilson is using that argument to say that the world can't sustain the population, he's wrong. If he's using the argument to say that human beings are misusing the resources, he's 100% right. And we as devotees know that better than anybody, and we really should not misuse Krishna's energy. We should use it sparingly and wisely and for the proper reasons. Thank you, Prabhu.
Yeah. On one hand, you've addressed it, but I was just looking at this line, first line in the purport. When one becomes angry, he forgets himself and his situation. But if one is able to consider his situation by knowledge, he transcends the influence of the modes of nature. And I'm wondering about that catch point, that tipping point, when one's able to consider one's situation. How does one avoid, because it says like anger falls from the sky, you were saying your blood boiling. How do we have that moment that we catch it when we feel it coming? And Prabhupada says you consider your situation. So maybe you could elaborate that before we fall into the abyss, but we see the signals coming. How, considering our situation, what is the dynamic there?
Well, firstly, I'm sure that you can answer the question better than me. Well, one thing I mentioned, of course, was even if we do fall victim to anger, certainly as devotees, but I'm sure even the non-devotees have that experience, that for many, there is regret afterwards. And I guess that regret is an educational tool for the next time it comes. I guess I could ask everybody. I think we know when that anger is coming. I think we can feel the temperature of the blood starting to rise. And I think through practice and through previous experience, that we will get to the point where when we sense it coming, that we will be able to check it. There's techniques, I guess, take deep breaths, count to 10, all those kind of different things, chant Hare Krishna, take yourself away from that. That's what we say when somebody is offending a devotee, what to speak of offending the guru, that you've different options, and some of those options are, pretty drastic, and you could probably find yourself in jail for a long time if you action any of them. But one of them is to leave the scene. So I guess to leave the scene of the situation that's causing that anger to rise in you. So I guess just through practice, through using techniques, through experience.
No, I liked your answer, this sense of regret. You think, wait, I've been down this road before and I don't like the way it ends. So that little wait a minute, I know what's happening here, in that sense of regret.
And some people, people who've actually killed because of anger, and they do. So much. Of course, generally it's fueled with intoxication. It's actually an incredible thing that people talk about intoxication. They say, well, in moderation it's okay. It's just so daft, this whole thing about moderation, There's so many crimes, or violent crimes and murders are a combination of intoxication, which we talk about the falling from the sky, and we talk about your blood boiling. Intoxication is basically like a fuel to the blood. That's what it is. It's like a jack-o'-lantern. It's like the fuel that makes those lanterns light. You're putting it inside your body, and it's just burns. Alcohol burns. It's hot. It's fiery, and it's just making your blood boil. Of course, devotees don't take alcohol, so therefore, in that sense, it's not relevant to us. But people who find themselves in prison for the rest of their life because something they did when they were young, because they got angry, it's interesting to listen or read some of their realizations as a result, because the regret is so powerful that you really do get an understanding that they would not allow that to happen again. You almost, because I read one testimony of a person who this happened to, and you almost feel, they should be let out because they've actually learned their lesson, and they would not repeat it. So I guess, I guess through practice, through the principle of regret, and we feel envy. For me, anger, just to talk a little bit about envy, for me, of those anartas, I always identify envy as being the most corrosive and the most destructive, that you're actually, and envy is another thing that leads to horrible things being done. So awareness, being aware of how corrosive and destructive these qualities actually are, and of course, as devotees, doing all the things that we should do so as that these things don't get fuel, like obviously intoxication, but lust. From lust, anger arises. So yes, we're all struggling with lust, but don't engage it. Don't engage that lust, because that's directly connected to the anger that will come from that. It's directly after. Yeah, so practice makes perfect. Okay, thank you all very much. And again, thank you all very, very much for allowing me, I was going to say us, I should speak for myself, but allowing for me to come and stay here in Ujjain. It really, really has been a wonderful experience. And just as I say that, the person that I see is Kapila Muni Prabhu. So I have to say a special thank you to him, because he was looking after me personally so nicely. Thank you, Kapila Prabhu. Srila Prabhupada ki!